Hello, hello. It is me, the Serial Yapper Legendary, and I'm back with an updated Infantry update vehicle tier list. So this is 2 wars after the Infantry update that dropped last year in November, and I'm here to talk about what the state of vehicles are like this time around, and basically giving everyone an updated opinion on how things are progressing in the world of Foxhole. So for this tier list, I will admit that I've only played Colonial since the last tier list video, but I've had the chance of testing out a couple of the Warden vehicles and capture a couple of Warden vehicles to use in earnest in these last couple of wars. So I have had experience in everything. I've tried them all out. So this time around, this will be a opinionated video based on my experiences over the last couple of months with the vehicles that we have at hand. Alright, so let's jump into it. And again, the tier lists are, or the tier rankings are essentially the same as last time. Overpowered needs a nerf. F is complete terrible, don't use it at all. And then S, I believe, is the sweet spot where vehicles perform as they should. They do their role perfectly. They don't really need to see any changes. If anything, maybe some slight tweaking here and there if the devs feel like it. Alright, but let's jump into it and get through as many as we can. Right, so first on the tier list, I've actually swapped the order around a little bit and decided to go through vehicles as listed on the wiki page as opposed to alphabetically. So the first couple of vehicles to talk about on our tier list is going to be the R1 and the Dunner Transport. And these two vehicles just go straight into Essential. There's no need to discuss them. They are there to bring logistics to the front. So great vehicles overall. Can't go wrong with them. 15 item slots, 100 BMATs. You can't win the war without logistics. And these are the workhorses for both teams. So essential tier list, and I'm not going to move them. All right. The next couple of vehicles to talk about then is going to be the motorcycles. So let's jump into the motorcycle tier lists. One thing to talk about for this tier list, I'm going to try and avoid things like truck variants, as they are all essential as well within their specific roles. And I think I've covered most of their logic in the previous video. So if you really want an opinion about the Logi trucks variants, go and check out that tier list in the previous one. All right, but let's talk about motorcycles. So here we have the Caster. This is the unarmed Colonial motorcycle. In my opinion, this retains its spot in the C tier, used for light recon, deploying listening kits, setting up tripod weapons, essentially running shirts. I've run a couple of 200 shirt carries with this motorcycle before. Great little motorcycle to have, go off-road with it, and just outrun enemies. Can't go wrong. Two inventory slots, great vehicle. Similarly, you have the Warden motorcycle. I'm also going to put this at the same at C tier. It doesn't do anything amazing. Again, it's just there to courier things around. So, great motorcycle, essential to have, and performs its job perfectly. Then we have the Stinger motorcycle. This has a Storm rifle gun. This is going to go in D tier. I don't really see the motorcycle used for the role that the devs intended it for. It's supposed to be this light recon anti-partisan vehicle. Any good partisan can probably snipe off the drivers, so I don't see it as a super important vehicle to have on the battlefront. So I'm going to put it under D tier. Doesn't do all that much. You might see some funny clips of like 3 or 4 motorcycles going around and, you know, sniping Logi trucks at best. But overall, there are better vehicles that perform their roles more eloquently. So we'll keep it at that. All right. The next thing to talk about are the light utility vehicles and all of their variants. First of all, let's talk about the Argonaut. The Argonaut has actually seen a bit of a nerf in this update. In my previous videos, I tiered it quite high. I think I put it under A tier, if not S tier. But this time, the devs heard a little bit because of the changes of how mud affects vehicles. So the Argonaut, in my opinion, is now in B tier because if the Argonaut gets muddy, it essentially can't carry items anymore, or at least heavy items. So previously we used to run Argonauts on trains, or we used to run Argonauts with trains to courier coal for it, and we also used to run B-mats with it to the front. This has seen a significantly less usage now just because of how mud and vehicle encumbrance affects the performance of vehicles themselves. The Argonaut does not have a strong engine, does not have very good traction. So previously it did its role in A tier. Now it's sort of dropping down to B tier just because it is a little bit heavier, especially once it's in the rainy season. And if you play Colonial, you know that it rains a lot in the southern hexes. So it's kind of dropped off its usefulness as a utility vehicle as opposed to just running with it empty and getting you from A to B. So it still performs okay-ish, but yeah, what can I say? The vehicle traction or the engine power of the Argonaut really needs an update now just to get it back to that A or S tier position. Right, the next thing to talk about is the Icarus. So this is the RPG variant. Last time I placed it under B tier, and I think it's going to stay in B tier. It is still the premier watchtower or anti-intelligence scout that the Colonials have. You can one-shot watchtowers with it, and there have been some great regiments like Jeep and other guys who go about sniping vehicles that are coming in for reinforcements. So these are border hopping, border sniping, partisan vehicles. They're great, so I'll keep them at B. And of course, they're also a little bit more armored than the Argonauts, so they can survive a couple more hits before they're disabled. Right, the next vehicle to talk about is the Odyssey. The Odyssey, also still a great vehicle, and I'm going to put it here with its brothers, and they form the trifecta of just decent LUV with their variants. Does its job well. Again, great for spotting, great for scouting. Is a little bit more armored, doesn't easily get sniped, so can't go wrong with it. Definitely deserving of a B ranking, in my opinion. Alright, let's move on to the Warden light utility vehicles. So we also have 3 in this category. So first we have the Drummond light utility vehicle. It's going to go in C tier. It performs worse under muddy conditions than the Colonial one. It is still decent in snowing weather, which is more favored for Warden regions, but overall still just does its job, but you can't really sticky suicide rush with it. I guess you could move some heavy explosives from A to B. Again, suffers from the same downsides as the Argonaut and the other LUVs, so I'll just keep it at this tier. It's essentially just a 9 inventory slot vehicle in a small frame. That's kind of what it does. Whereas the Argonaut is faster in most cases, unless it's muddy. Right, then we have the Ducky. This is the Warden amphibious LUV vehicle, or the Drummond Loscan, but we call it the Ducky. I still hold that this is one of the best utility vehicles in the game. This time it's going to go in A tier. Doing amphibious partisan work with the Ducky has definitely gotten better since a lot of the partisan heavy explosives got buffed in the last couple of patches. So things like satchel charges, as well as the Havoc charges, especially the Havoc charges, now that they can be placed inside of town bases or other buildings that were quite restricted in using them. Devs really did a solid for partisans, especially like the demolition partisans, and the Ducky being able to get around defenses using waterways has made it a lot better. Now, don't get me wrong, I would not use a Ducky as a general use vehicle on the front line, but for its role as a scout vehicle and a partisan operations vehicle, this is now amazing. I really do think that the Ducky got a decent amount of love just by buffing the damage that Satchel Charges and Havoc Charges did for Wardens. So, great vehicle. You guys really need to play with this one more. I've seen some great partisan videos about how Duckies just do work, and Wardens definitely got some love with this one. Alright, the next is the Drummond Spitfire. So, I'm going to put this under B tier. I got hunted by these things like crazy in the last couple of wars. This is, in my opinion, probably the best anti-solo, partisan, anti-spotter vehicle in the game. You just have to be careful with how you use it. Don't overly rely on its armament. Infantry can avoid and sidestep you and then hit you with an Ignifist or a Sticky. So you just have to watch out when you use this. Pay attention. It's almost on par with like an armored car in terms of running in, stopping a spotter from scouting for artillery, or quickly disabling a CV or something like that. I do think armored cars still serve that role great, but the Spitfire is not bad. So I moved it up a little bit in the tier list. I think it's good, does its job. Killing solo targets or killing small groups of infantry, that's what this thing excels at. Yeah, don't put it in the front line. It won't survive for very long. Right, the next thing to talk about now is actually the armored cars. So let's talk about the Colonial armored cars first, and then we'll dip into the Warden ones. So the Colonial base armored car, the Xiphos, in my opinion, still great for a behind the tank line defender. So I'm going to put it under A tier. Again, Colonials don't have an easy anti-infantry solution besides using the 12.7mm weapons on some of the very heavy tanks near the end of the tech tree. So for all other cases, you would like to have a Xiphos just protecting you against sticky rushes and flask rushes. So in my opinion, still the best. Wardens have alternative options to having an armored car in their tank line, specifically with the updates to their cruiser tanks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for Colonials, you still want an armored car somewhere in your tank line, just to stop those night rushes, big blobs of infantry coming from behind and sticking all your stuff. So still an essential vehicle, still does its job great, dirt cheap to make. I love the lone Xiphos in your tank line, so it stays right there. Okay, Gemini. Gemini is still crap. It's an RPG platform, not as fast as the Icarus. Does shoot 2 rockets at the same time, but realistically, there are very few targets in the game that require this level of lack of mobility that can eat 1 or 2 rockets and shrug it off and disappear. I would rather have more speed. I would rather have more utility in having radar vision with the Icarus. So I'm comparing it to the Icarus itself. It just doesn't do well. And it gets disabled very easily. So yeah, Gemini. If Colonials needs to shoot RPG rockets and there's a Gemini lying around, I would use one. But other than that, terrible weapon. Or terrible vehicle. Just avoid it. Okay. So the next is the Percutio. Unfortunately, the Percutio has significantly dropped in usefulness. It is now also an F tier. And this is because the devs significantly changed the role of 20mm weapons in the game. Previously, Percutios could go toe-to-toe with a lot of vehicles in flanking maneuvers. There were regiments that specifically used the Percutios to kill super heavy tanks and to kill tank lines with them. The idea is you spam a whole lot of these 20mm Percutio armored cars, get behind the enemy, and shred them to bits. But because of the changes of 20mm, most significantly, 20mm can no longer disable vehicle systems, and it now always penetrates the vehicles, but does almost no damage to it whatsoever. It does 3% or 4% vehicle health damage, as opposed to 10 to 12% that it did last time. Yeah, it lost a lot of its first strike capabilities. It doesn't do enough damage, or it doesn't disable the enemies now to put it on par with some of its desired targets. So sadly, Pushgun is now in F tier just because of the 20mm changes. It has nothing to do with the rest of the vehicle. The rest of the vehicle is still great, but it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So I wouldn't use it. You're better off grabbing 2 Ignifists and shooting a tank with it, as opposed to using a Pushgun. Alright. Now let's move on and talk about the Warden armored cars. There's quite a couple of them, so let's just dive right through. So we have the base O'Brien. This is an okay armored car. It does not perform the same role as the Colonial one, specifically when it comes to mid to late game, as this is only an early game anti-infantry solution that the Wardens have. But the moment you start having cruiser tanks, this tank's role gets immediately replaced by these heavier armors. So for the time that it comes out, it does perfectly okay. So I'm going to put it under C tier. It just does its job. And then late game, when there are Colonials with recon outfit, you would like to have more intelligence or intelligence bearing vehicles like the Drummond on the field, or the Spitfire Drummond. So it's better to have more intel as opposed to just the same capacity of ammunition out on the field. Alright, so that's it for the O'Brien. It's an okay armored car, but it drops off, whereas the Xiphos stays relevant until much later on in the game. Right, the next is the O'Brien Nave. Now, the O'Brien Nave got a little bit of a buff because it has a new ammo type that it can use. It can now use armor-piercing grenades. They work similarly to Tremolos, except they don't do structural damage. And in my opinion, the AP grenade is pretty good at dealing with support weapons. Now, when the devs announced the AP grenades and what they were supposed to do, they were supposed to be these, like, you know, wreck tanks alternative to flasks. But that didn't quite end up with what they performed at on the battlefield. So instead, these grenades are really good at supporting tank lines as opposed to just, you know, doing massive amounts of damage like the flask and the stickies do. So the role for these grenades and the way that they affect the Nave, in my opinion, is that the Nave is very much solidified now as a support vehicle. You use the AP grenades to do things like clearing tripod weapons and clearing or damaging pushguns after the pushguns are decrewed, and you initiate that combat by throwing in a couple of shrapnel grenades or throwing in a couple of smoke or gas grenades, and then you swap over, pull out the AP grenades, and then toss it on tripods to kill them. So for a support vehicle, it does decently. I'm going to put it under D tier. It's not complete dog water like it used to be, just because I think the AP grenades are very much underlooked by the Water faction. I think they do their job okay, and this is a platform to shoot them from. So it's not amazing. If the AP grenades were much stronger, or maybe they dealt damage on impact, I would definitely put the Nave much higher. But for its role as a support vehicle, you can't go wrong. I mean, it's basically just 2 Lunaires on wheels, a little bit protected, and you can roll over mines, or you can roll over 1 mine and doesn't get disabled. So that's some random utility to it. It's not complete trash, but again, you probably won't see more than 1 or 2 of these on the front for the entire war. Right, the next is the Gravekeeper, the Bone Car. Now, arc ammo got a bit of a buff. They're much more damaging. They have a higher chance of penetrating. So I think the Bone Car would perform well if more Wardens made it. Specifically for quickly disabling medium tanks and then disappearing before they can retaliate. So for that intended purpose, I think Bone Cars deserve a B ranking. There are better vehicles that shoot arc ammo, but it's not bad. So again, it's one of these, it's a platform to shoot arc ammo from. So it does decently. It has really short range. So again, this might be a vehicle that you might see one or two of behind a tank line, roll in, take a shot, and then disappear. But it's not bad. Arc ammo is not bad. So it goes into B tier. Could be better, could be worse. We'll leave it at that. Right, the next is the Freeman. And the O'Brien Freeman is the hack. Shoots 40 mil. Again, it's just a platform for shooting 40 mil. It does better than the Pushgun that the Wardens get around the same time. So I'll leave it at B tier. It's fine for shooting 40 mil. You kind of have to reverse it into combat, so it is a little bit weird, but it's not terrible. So we'll leave the O'Brien at a comfy B. All right, the next is the Wildjack. The Wildjack is the flame armored car. So, in my opinion, this is, again, it's another platform to get a flamethrower in a fight. I will say that flame weapons have seen a little bit of a shake-up with the introduction of flame mortars. But for the most part, if you need an armored solution to get flame on a safe house or on a town hall for just a moment to stop repairs, I would throw a flamejack just to get a lick of fire, prevent repairs, and then rush it in with chieftains or other 250mm weapon platforms. So I think C tier is fine. Does this job fine. It is tracked, so it's a little bit better off-road. Can't go wrong with the flame tack or the Wildjack. So put it under C tier, but there are better fire weapons for Wardens to make use of. Right, and then the final vehicle to talk about is the tracked armored car. I would put this on par with the Spitfire because of its tracked aspect. It's better off-road. That's one of the biggest downsides to armored cars. They're really, really slow off-road. And the tracked armored car just makes up for that fact. Another interesting tidbit with all the tracked armored cars that the Wardens have, so the TAC and the Wildjack, is they actually got a bit of a speed buff because their engines are slightly stronger, so they're not as affected by mud as the Colonial weapons. So they're slightly better. But for the most part, again, anti-infantry solution, it's great, but it's still, you don't see these as much as the Zyphos late game, just because, again, Wardens have better general anti-infantry capabilities with their main battle tanks. Alright, so again, decent weapon. It is better than the flame tack because the flame tack can easily get surrounded by infantry and, stickied and rushed. The attack survives a little bit better in that aspect, so I'll leave it at that stage here. Shoots infantry, does this job, can scurry away, slightly faster than its Colonial variant, so does its job perfectly fine. So B tier it is. Alright, so that's it for all the sort of light armored vehicles in the game. Let's now move on to things that get slightly more tankier and slightly more useful, but not all that much, with the Colonial Tankettes on the line. So first is the 12.7 Tankette. So our first introduction to 12.7 in the game, at least when it comes to vehicles, and it's not great. It's open top. So I don't care much for these little Tankettes. They get stolen very easily. They don't do that great in suppressing because they have a small magazine clip. They only have 75 bullets per clip. They have some random utility in the fact that they can carry multiple items inside of its inventory slots. They do have inventory slots for 3 items. It's okay, but I just don't like the open top aspect of it. It's very easily tracked. It's very easily disabled by 1 or 2 stickies. The battlefield will be fine without these being everywhere. So, yeah. Put it under D tier. There are better ways to shoot 12.7. This just happens to be the first one, besides the Pushguns that we'll talk about a little bit later. Alright, so that's it for the Tankettes, and let's move on. The next is the Flame Tankette. So I would put this on par with the regular tankette, the 12.71, just because sometimes you just need a lick of flame. You just need to touch that town base to burn it to the ground, make it dead, and this is what the Vesta can do. So it's not as good as the Wildjack, but again, it might be a way to just finish off a safe house or something like that. So again, suicide vehicle almost. Go in there, put a little bit of fire on it, and then it's over. But more than that, hasn't changed much. Actually, now that I think about it, I think the 12.7 doesn't do that great. So I'm just gonna move this down a little bit. So the base tankette, that open top just completely puts me off. And actually, I think the flame tankette also goes with it. I think this is the ranking I had with them last time, and I'm going to keep with this just because there are way better options, way better ways to spend your resources. There are better ways to put 12.7 and fire on the front line. So put them at F. Not that great. Could use a bit of love. All right, Ixion. So this is the Colonial 30mm tankette. It's okay. It's not great. Just put it under D tier here. The infantry support gun is better. ISG just does its job so much more significantly. And with the changes to tripods as well, getting a little bit beefier a couple patches ago, I think the tankette just it's okay. It shoots 3 mil, but you're not going to win too many wars with it. You're not going to do any flankings with it. It's heavily affected by Bud. Meh weapon, and gets the meh D tier, just like that. Okay, the next is the Dionysius, which is the fire rocket tankette. This has dropped off quite a lot since the last video because of the introduction of fire mortars. So fire rockets are still decent, but fire mortars does its roles a lot better now. So it has gone from A tier to C tier just because fire mortars are a lot more prevalent. They're easy to deploy. So fire rockets overall has dropped off a little bit. So C tier it goes just because it has all the downsides of the tankette, but doesn't have all the upsides of the significance of fire rockets anymore. So drop it off in tier list, just a tiny amount. All right. Now let's move on to the next tier of armored weapons, which is the APCs. Now, the APCs are awesome now because of the introduction of heavy 20mm infantry weapons. I used the APCs a lot in War 119, and as a result of War 119, the APCs actually got a little bit of a nerf just due to the fact that 20mm was doing too much damage to all sizes of ships. So within the first week of War 119 came out, there were a bunch of Colonials that snuck onto a Warden submarine with the new anti-tank rifles, and they managed to kill the submarine in under like 2 minutes. And then 2 days later, that got nerfed. And then after that, I was like, wow, these things are still pretty awesome at killing naval stuff in general. So I took out APCs to go out and attack gunboats using 20mm rounds to their hull damage. And I sank a lot of Warden gunboats, which resulted in 20mm getting nerfed again. And there's a running joke within WL right now that everything I touch seems to get nerfed. And that seems to be holding true. But despite all that, where does the Acheron, this is the unupgraded APC, now land? I still think that 20mm is a little strong. So unless we see some more changes, I'm going to put this under A tier. And the reason is you can have 3 or 4 guys all shooting 20mm rounds on it. It's dirt cheap to make. These things can compete with the Warden gunboat still. Even though it got nerfed, it still performs better than the Colonial gunboat. So Yeah, Acheron goes in A tier. Wild. It was like a utility vehicle last time. Now it's an Ender A tier. But that's what I believe. That's what I firmly believe. I really do think that the APCs are in a good spot. They're not quite S tier because that's where the Doru's gonna go. The Doru is a great APC. The Wardens hate this thing because the 12.7 is really good at sniping passengers out of naval vessels. It's, again, relatively cheap to make. The 20mm ammo rifles, so the Colonial Dawn, or if you manage to capture a Booker Greyhound or a Stadlerly, this becomes a menace for small to medium ships on the water. So, yeah, great vehicle. I love this thing. I played with it a lot. If you were to ask me what its state would be at the end of War 119 before the nerf hit got hit, this would have been in my overpowered tier. But I think the devs rightfully nerfed it. So right now it's in a good space. It's really good for fighting gunboats. It's so weird. The APCs are a better gunboat than the Colonial gunboat. And the Doru and the Acheron earn their spots higher up on the tier list. I suspect that we're probably going to see some bigger changes coming to 20mm and naval combat. I think the devs really like, whoa, we didn't expect certain things to happen. So we'll probably see some changes, but right now, the 12.7mm machine gun on the Doru, you snipe the driver out of a gunboat with a flank, and then you just roll up and murder them with 20mm stickies. Great little APC. I love it. And it's going to stay in S tier. It's my first S tier vehicle. It's a stupid Doru, but whatever. It's great. And then the Warden APC performs exactly the same as the Acheron. I've also seen some great Warden Marines causing trouble with this thing. Again, loaded up with Dawns, loaded up with flamethrowers. Quickly snipe out Colonial gunboats or do partisan work with it. Can't go wrong. Gets the A tier ranking. Not going to go any better. Could use a 12.7 on it, honestly. Hopefully someday the Wardens get some love in that aspect, but as it is, it's fine. It's a great vehicle. Okie dokie. That being said, let's move on to the next category, where let's quickly talk about some of the pushguns. And I'm trying to organize this tier list in sort of the same levels of how things unlock. So before we get into Halftracks, let's quickly talk about some of the early game pushguns, and then we'll come back to it once we go further down the tech list. So Colonial 12.7 pushgun. I will preface this by saying that all the pushguns got a little bit of a nerf because of the changes to suppression. So vehicles are now able to be suppressed, and pushguns in particular can now be suppressed by MG fire. So if you roll a pushgun into another pushgun and they both start blasting, the spread on all the pushguns just go wild. So this is a significant nerf to all pushgun gaming. And it's not just limited to the machine gun and the 20mm pushguns, it's also accounting for the 68mm pushguns and the 40mm pushguns, etc. So pushguns overall are significantly weaker since the last tier list. So because of this, the Colonial pushgun, I think the last time I put it under C, now goes into D. Oh, actually it might also have been D before, but you know what? It retains this spot just because of the changes of how pushguns now perform when suppressed by other pushguns. So you'll see lots of these in the early game. Mid to late game, you won't see any of these at all, just because you can now suppress a pushgun with a Malone or a gassed infantry 12.7, or a rat catcher. You managed to find a rat catcher on the front. So yeah, pushguns overall perform worse. They now reveal themselves at night, so they can easily be tapped by long-range vehicles. So not that great, and we'll keep the Sagittari as a D tier, and coincidentally, that's the same ranking we're also going to give the Warden one. D tier, maybe even less. I might actually put this one as F tier as well for the Warden ones, because I didn't see a lot of them this war or the war before. And again, the suppression mechanic really screwed over Pushguns quite a bit. So until DevMan changes it, yeah. Actually, you know what? Just put it on F tier as well. I used to love playing with these things, but now they're so much worse. They're not as affected by vehicle bloom all that much because of the slow rate of movement. But yeah, it's like a pushgun starts firing, another pushgun fires back at it, it's now suppressed, it turns its barrel, it now suppresses the other one, and I was like, no one hits anything, nothing gets done, no damage is dealt. So yeah, pushguns not in the great state, and the 12.7 ones definitely reflect that. Similarly, because of the nerfs to 20mm, I feel like the Colonial 20mm pushgun is not in a good spot at all, and the Warden 20mm pushgun also now properly gets countered by 12.7. So their intended role was to punch holes in early game armor, but the way you beat early game armor now is you suppress it with 12.7, and then it has to run away. Or you disable it, or something like that. Yeah, not great. Both 20mm pushguns significantly less useful than they used to be. So, and again, hopefully some changes to 20mm appears, and then these can make a bit of a comeback. All right, let's move on to slightly more dangerous. So this is the battering ram. This is the Colonial 68mm pushgun. The battering ram I regarded very highly in the last tier list. I put it under A tier. This is now going to go down to B. Again, is still really good at punching holes into anything up to light armor, or light tank armor. So still pretty good at winning certain fights, but it now reveals itself at night, and I really hate that. So if you take a shot with a pushgun, and you're facing off with something with more range, notably something like a ATHT, it can now see where you fired from, reposition, or run away. So previously, you were able to snipe certain vehicles. You can no longer do that. And it now gets suppressed by 12.7. Not great. And similarly, the Warden 68mm definitely is not as worth it anymore. It actually goes down to D tier. So this is the Collins cannon. So this is it's basically just the battering ram but blue. Goes down to D tier, and sadly, also easily revealed at night now. Also gets suppressed. Could do better, but unfortunately, that's where it's at with pushgun meta. All right, the Warden 40mm. I'm gonna put it under D tier as well. It's still not completely useless because it's an alternative to using a hack. But yeah, short range, and gets revealed, and gets suppressed by 12.7. Man, pushgun's not in a great spot. So we'll keep it at D tier as well. All right, let's go back to where we were. So now we have significant early game vehicles on the roster. Let's go and talk about some half-tracks, and we'll run through the Colonial ones first. So the Javelin. My love child. Man, I really love the Javelin. But it is in a terrible spot now because of vehicle bloom and the nerfs to the Typhon. So just so you guys are aware, the Typhon got affected by the 20mm changes. Again, all the problems that I had with all the other 20mm discussion up until this point also applies to the Javelin, as that was its primary weapon besides the ISG. So, used to be an A tier, Javelin now goes down to B tier. Still good for deploying an ISG, still good for getting momentum on the field. But yeah, definitely affected by just the 20mm nerf in general. And I really wish, again, devs would reconsider how that weapon platform works, as it now has significantly affected how the Javelin performs in general. Peltast. In slight contrast, the Peltast is now S tier, because this is a way to deploy fire mortars. Fire mortars are crazy good, so it's not quite overpowered. It's still difficult to get to them. You need a facility to build them. So if fire mortars were to to factories, in towns, then the Peltast would definitely be on the overpowered tier list. But fire mortars are good. Again, just having a touch of flame while a target is being pounded by a lot of artillery or is about to get rushed and you put it on fire, Peltast is an easy way to do that. So it goes into S tier. Isn't affected by any of the Typhon changes, because obviously it doesn't put tripod weapons on it, but is a way to put fire mortars in the hands of the Warden faces. In the hands of Warden faces, yeah, that makes sense. But yes, Peltast, much better than before. Colonials definitely have been using mortars more this war as a way to counteract the oppressive Warden gunboat, as well as putting a liquefier in a target, and then it suffers the consequences. So Peltast, S tier, and it's not going to go down. So this is the Hoplite. Hoplite is the Colonial armored half-track. It's a variant, can tow things. Also goes down a little bit. Again, maybe not as significantly more down than the Javelin, because the Javelin was very much a you put a Typhon on it and you go ham. The Hoplite is more of a steady platform for your ISG. So it performs a little bit differently, and again has the utility of pulling things through with its tow bar. Not going to put it any lower. Again, you're not going to win a lot of wars with the Hoplite, but it's not the worst thing seeing this thing on the front. Again, to help suppress things with 12.7, etc. But yeah, not as good as holding out against dives because of 20 mil changes. Right, the next thing to talk about is this is the Niska Mark 1. So this is the Warden half-track. Warden half-tracks, again, not as significant as the Colonial ones, just because ISGs perform as the better tripod weapons. The Wardens did get a bit of a buff with the arc ammo boost. So they technically could perform better, but if you're going to be throwing arc ammo at the enemy, Bone Car would be the easiest platform to deploy as opposed to the half-track. Also the cheaper option, slightly faster. So I wouldn't put arc ammo on the Warden half-track. So you're stuck putting on a Rat Catcher or a Foe Breaker. Meh weapons. Gets a meh ranking. Can't pull towed vehicles like it can with the Colonial upgraded half-track. So it's a meh vehicle. It gets a meh ranking. I don't think the Wardens will be too upset if I put their base half-track in here. The next thing to talk about is the Twin Scar. So this is the upgraded half-track that can pull things, but it has 2 storm rifle guns. Okay, it gets D tier just for the fact it can pull things and not completely suck like a dinner transport, but overall better ways to get storm rifle guns on the front. Taking up 3 player slots to man this thing. Wouldn't put too many of it in. You know what? Just, pull in fuel for your heavy. Pull in some fuel for your tanks. Drop the fuel and then suicide this into a trench line to kill some infantry. That's its job, in my opinion. I don't see anything significant that the Wardens need to tow into battle. They don't need to pull in 120mm guns like we have to. Everything else could just be put on a flatbed. Odd fuel half-track support, but not more than that. Okay, Niska Blinder. The Blinder. This was one of my overpowered vehicles last time because it comes out in a time or in a spot in the tech tree where it uncontested uncontested. Now, despite the fact that the Battering Ram, its natural enemy, got countered, I actually think that the Blinder has seen some significant nerfs because of the effect of Bloom on vehicles. I did briefly get to try out the Blinder in a tank line situation in War 120. So this is not just based off of me fighting against it. I actually did get to try this vehicle. And I think that the Blinder is now in S tier just because of the Bloom changes. for the most part, when this vehicle goes into combat, it moves into a position, holds that position, and fires. And because it's still 45-meter range, it doesn't have a natural enemy. And because of the changes to pushguns, making them slightly harder to use and can be suppressed, it sort of counteracts with the way that the blinder was so oppressive to all the other vehicles on the battlefield. So it's still good. You can still roll a couple of these blinders into a tank line and they will happily eat away at light tanks, but they can be dived more easily because once the half-track moves, the bloom on the reticle for the gun moves quite a bit. And when I got to play in one of these things, a Colonial captured blinder, I had to tell my driver to stop moving or else I can't hit the targets. So this is now you move into position, you hold position, you fire, and you retreat. Now, this again unlocks at a point in the tech tree where it doesn't have any significant counters. There's no other Colonial 45-meter weapon that could really deal with it. And if you rush it with a light tank, it still technically can win because it can reverse quite quickly. So overall, it is still strong, but it is not blindingly overpowered anymore. So goes into S tier. It does its job great for the time it unlocks, but late game, there are way better options we'll talk about a little bit. But when it unlocks and its presence in the battlefield, it gets its S ranking and it's not going to go down. The Skycaller. Alright, fire rockets, like I said, aren't as prevalent as it did before, but fire rockets still significantly do better than HE rockets. Previously, I put the Skycaller as overpowered. I think it's now down to S tier just because of the rebalancing using incendiary mortars. Incendiary mortars, like I said, is a much better way to get fire at distance on the battlefield. So Skycaller is still amazing if you have like 5 or 6 of these things and they just unload fire rockets on a tier 2 base. But if you're selectively sniping a key structure and you just need a touch of fire to get it going, fire mortars do better. So fire rockets overall less impactful, so goes down one tier list or one tier ranking down to S tier. And I think that's great. I think that was an indirect way to nerf fire rockets by introducing a fire weapon that performs better, and therefore any vehicles that use fire rockets now saw a little bit of change. Okie dokie. The next thing to talk about is going to be artillery. So, artillery is very easy. So this is the Colonial 120 gun. It's essential. It goes into this tier slot over here. You can't win the war without it. So, artillery pretty much has gone relatively unchanged. And on that note, the Warden 120 also is an essential weapon. So it can stay right there alongside of it. Right. Was there any other changes with the infantry update that came with artillery? No, there were some proposed changes to concrete. But overall, artillery still essential. You can't not have artillery out there causing trouble for both sides. So we'll keep it at that. Can't win the war without that. The next vehicle to talk about is the laughably counterpart to the Colonial 120, which is the Warden 250. Last time I put it under S. It's going to stay in S. It is still a great weapon to have. It's not an essential weapon to have, but it performs its job perfectly fine. You roll one of these things into a relic base and you kill the darn relic base. And because fire mortars are easily deployed now by just literally one dude with a mortar tube and like 4 fire mortars, can quickly put a relic base on fire just for a couple of seconds. You roll in with 250s and you clear it out. Great weapon. Wardens definitely need to build more of these. And props to KRGG, because they built a lot of these when they attacked into Allied's Blight in War 119. And man, these things did work. They cleared so many concrete trenches, gun emplacements. So props to some of the Warden regiments using more of these en masse. It's great to see it. So yeah, great weapon. can't go wrong with the Balfour Falconer 250. I really wish the Colonials had one. Damn man, please. Okay, next vehicle to talk about is some of the heavier push guns, but not the tier 3 ones. We'll come back to those. So the first is the Warden high velocity. So this is the Balfour Rampart. So high velocity 68 mil. Still significant. Despite the overall nerfs to push guns, I still think that high velocity 68 is worth rolling out. Put 2 or 3 of these on the road at night. Even though they get revealed, they can shred Colonial tanks that are not respecting the nighttime pushes. So still good. I really wish Colonials had one, but Balfour Rampart still does its job great. Yeah, leave it at that. Colonial Smelter. Man, I really want to put this under Essential because Colonials really are lacking in the 45 meter department. So I'm actually going to put the Smelter up here. I've seen more regiments use these, again, to clear off emplacements and pushing bases. Shred did some amazing work using these high velocity 40 mil shots in War 120 when we were pushing King. So great push gun, does its job well. Again, did see a bit of a nerf with the changes to push guns being revealed and night gameplay, but overall can't go wrong with one of these on the front line. Does really well, but it might actually be S tier in terms of its role and what it does. So I will actually put the Smelter in S tier now, just because it is an essential tool to clear off entrenchments and to wipe things out at long range. So Colonials need some long range, and this is one of the few weapon platforms that actually gets there. So we'll upgrade it to S tier. Right, the next push gun to talk about is the Warden Wasp Nest. This gets F tier. Fire Mortars just does better. Wardens really don't build this thing. This is a way to shoot fire rockets until you get the blinder, just like before. So it stays where it is. Alright. That basically does it for all the mid-range push guns. There are still some heavy push guns that we can talk about a little bit later, but we'll come back to it. Alright. The next thing to talk about then, though, is let's quickly just do a couple of additional artillery platforms. And once we do the artillery platforms, we can roll into the actual tanks, which is probably the main meat of this video. So let's quickly talk about 150 millimeter and the various platforms that all the both factions have to shoot it at least the entry level tier. So over here, this is the Colonial 150 and the Warden 150. They're about on par. The Colonial one has slightly more range but more spread, and the Warden one has lower range but less spread, so it's more accurate. Again, you can't fight the war without these, so they're always going to be essential. Until DevMan gives us an alternative to using artillery like this, we're always going to see that. We're always going to see 120s, we're always going to see 150s when they unlock. It's massive chanting in world chat for both sides because the heavier ordnance is better at breaking bases. Once we see changes to concrete, if we see changes to concrete, if that ever happens, because DevMan was teasing some concrete changes a couple of patches ago, I might change how I have an outlook on artillery. But until that happens, essential weapons, can't go wrong with them. Shoot artillery at enemy, make them have a bad day. Alrighty. So that's it for the artillery platforms. Finally, let's get into tanks. So let's start off with the smallest tanks in the game, which are the scout tanks. So, oops. Copied the wrong thing. Let's try that again. The Warden Kingspire. So 12.7 millimeter scout tank, has radar, detects enemies, wipes out Colonial infantries in droves. This is an A tier weapon. You toss this into your tank line and it basically is a support vehicle. It does the same role as the Colonial armored car does, as, you know, clearing out infantry, but it can suppress, and it does great things at suppressing things like pushguns. It has seen significantly more utility with the changes to suppression. I actually think this is S tier. I actually think the Kingspire does really, really well. Can't go wrong with it. You always want to have one or two of these in your front, just for the fact that they can have that fast moving 360 turret, can detect enemies with its radar coverage. It is a better role. It is basically an upgraded Spitfire, but it just does way more. Can't go wrong with it. Kingspire does really well. Gets the S tier ranking. King Jester, F tier. HE rockets have seen less and less and less significance with the introduction of fire mortars. So this is horrible tier. Don't make these. Don't make King Jesters. They suck. So F tier. Wardens really can just avoid HE rockets and life will be fine. Alright, the next one is the King Gallant. This is the 30mm scout tank, and it does a meh job. It's a platform to shoot 30mm for Wardens. Wardens have been building more 30mm than before because of a new tank that they added to the game. So it might have some slightly more utility, as Wardens will probably have more 30mm readily available for use. So this time around, the King Gallant might see a little bit more play, but as soon as light tanks unlock, there's going to be a shift in armament to 40mm rounds. And again, kind of competes with the O'Brien, and the O'Brien, I believe, just does more damage faster. So you have 2 or 3 of these in the line, and they push a road and they take out some bases. These you could probably take off-road, and they can fight lightly armored tanks that are not paying attention, or armored cars. So they're okay, but you don't see them late game, and they drop off very, very quickly. So they have a brief moment of being a threat on the battlefield before they disappear. Right. So that's it for all the scout tank variants. Kingspire top. Again, just because of suppression mechanic changes, this is a great vehicle to have as utility support out on the field. Okay, now we dive into light tanks. So let's talk about the Colonial Hatchet. Colonial Hatchet is the first opportunity for Colonials to shoot 40mm. It is an okay tank. It does its job fine. It gets a C tier. It's the bread and butter tank of the game. Just comes out mid-war, destroys bases, pushes things, makes infantry scream, and it's a reason why you really want to start producing lots of sticky grenades and flasks. So overall, a fine tank. So gets a C rating. Here we have the Vulcan. This goes under A tier. This is the best non-artillery fire vehicle in the game still. Doesn't do anything more than running in, putting something ablaze into a tier 3, tier 4 fire before it finally dies. So does its job perfectly fine. Gets the A ranking. It's the best flame weapon that Colonials can make. Pelekis. I'm going to make this a large image because we need to talk about the poor Pelekis. So previously, this was the premier Colonial weapon to fight against most Warden tank lines. Sadly, the Pelekis has seen a massive nerf in its utility and its usability because of the way that weapon blooms work. So devs added weapon blooms to tanks, so when a tank moves, it cannot fire its turret accurately. Previously, the Pelekis was a bit of a nightmare to man. You have to be in perfect coordination between the driver and the gunner to land shots. This is still the case. It is still very hard to aim the Pelekis to fire its shot. And because of the changes to weapon bloom, if the Pelekis moves a millimeter, the weapon bloom on this gun goes to maximum. This has made the Pelekis very hard to use. This is now a skill expression tank. Previously, you did need a bit of skill to use it. Now it's like you really need to be good and you need to know the limitations of this tank to use it effectively. This is absolutely the worst tank for new players to try. It is really hard to use. And the devs have put an alternative for this tank that comes out 2 or 3 tech levels after it. So because of this, and the fact that the Pelekis really need some love, I'm actually taking it all the way down to F tier. The Pelekis is not good. Now you might be wondering, well, hey, wasn't the Blinder the same thing as the Pelekis? No, because remember the Blinder comes out to 2 tech levels beforehand, has no natural counter, doesn't have its engine sitting in the front, and when the Blinder moves and shoots, it typically holds a position, fires, and retreats. The Pelekis is a move in, take a shot, and retreat before counterfire hits it. Pelekis can no longer do this. The Pelekis can't dance in a tank line. The weapon bloom is terrible. So, I would not recommend that new players use the Pelekis all that much. There is a better tank that has replaced it, but it only comes out like 2 tech levels after the Pelekis is teched. So, for a while, the Pelekis does okay to bad, but after that, you just don't see them anymore. And there's a reason why the Wardens have been very upset with the new tank that was released, because it just does its role completely as it did before. So, fortunately, LTD, I really love playing this thing. I really can't. There is just a better tank that replaced it. So, it goes into F tier. I really hope that they make some changes to how the Pelekis works, because the bloom is just insane. It's like, literally, you move 2 meters and the bloom goes to maximum. The Pelekis, in my opinion, is essentially now a 68mm pushgun that needs to be deployed before it can be shot. It's that bad. It is really terrible. And that's why you don't really see them on the front anymore. Sad day for Pelekis gamers. Okay, next vehicle is the Kroneshka. This is the upgraded hatchet. This goes into A tier. Has more armor, more mobility, has the funny boost. Does perfectly fine. Bloom has affected a little bit, but all tanks are affected by Bloom now. Yeah, can't go wrong with the Cranny. It is just a better hatchet. So, why wouldn't you want to upgrade your hatchet into one? So, gets into A tier, shoots 40 mil. Nothing more to say about it. Okay, base divot. These are basically all the other light tanks have remained mostly unchanged. So the base divot is better than the base hatchet, so it goes into B tier, and the Ironhide, which is the upgraded divot, goes into B tier as well. So no significant changes to them. Still performs better than the base hatchet. Actually, I think this might be. I actually think that they're A tier. Yeah. A tier light tanks, very good. Can't go wrong with them. Cranny might be a little bit less. But you know what? Let's keep them at the same tier. I think they all perform relatively the same. I will say though that the Ironhide and the divot, the base divot, still has a higher chance to bounce shots. So I always try and flank these things just because they're so darn difficult to get through their frontal armor. But yeah, still perform great. Can't go wrong with light tanks as your premier opener tank to play around with. Right, David Kane. This is now a S tier vehicle because of the fire mortar changes. Again, fire mortars are insanely good. Just a touch of fire to burn something down, stop repairs. It goes on par with the Peltest, and yeah, sees significant use. We might see some changes to fire mortars, might be nerfed a little bit, but as they are, I think they're fine. So, David Kane, the mortar light tank MLD, does its job perfectly fine. Okie dokie, let's talk about some slightly heavier vehicles with the Colonial Scorpion. So Scorpion saw a little bit of nerfs, a couple of nerfs. This is just to the fact that it is now less ammunition. does fire 12.7, so it has seen some usefulness in taking out or suppressing pushguns. And it is now the base vehicle for the Ballista Scorpion line. I actually think that the Scorpion saw a bit of a buff. Has been changed. Has been buffed in the fact that you now see more people hammer it out and use it. And this is good for the Colonial tank lines. In my humble opinion, you always want a Scorpion in a tank line, just so that it can suppress garrisons, so infantry can push up, it can suppress enemies sitting in trenches, and most significantly, because of bloom being added and sometimes 40mm is harder to hit pinpoint accurate shots against infantry now, you really need something that can suppress trenches, specifically if there's lots of tripods and stuff sitting on the trenches as well. You don't want infantry to just run around. So Scorpions have seen a better... I genuinely think that the Scorpion, being the base vehicle, is a good change for the Colonial faction. You almost always want to see the random Scorpion on the front as opposed to the random Ballista. The random Ballista might see a little bit of action, but it'll probably just get focused down by Warden tanks and then it's over. Whereas the Scorpion actually wants to get focused because it holds a lot of BMATs. It usually has a lot of people repairing it. Infantry can sit on the back and jump off it and do some fun stuff with it. Yeah, Scorpion is great. And I genuinely think that it's really good for its role. It's not perfect, but, you know, A tier is a comfortable spot to put it in. All right. The next thing to talk about is let's get into some vehicles that definitely see a little bit of action. Let's start off with the cruiser tanks before we talk about the remaining main battle tanks that get teched midway through the war. So the first is the Brigand. So the Brigand is the new Warden base vehicle that you need to build to make Outlaws, Highwaymen, and the Bone Lords. So this is a repeater 30mm cannon with an exposed 12.7 storm rifle gunner sitting near the top of the vehicle. I have seen this tank everywhere, and in my opinion, the Brigand is a decent to bad main battle tank in the sense that you fire random targets with it. You don't really push enemy armor with this. It's better to use Devets with their 40mm shot, whereas this one can sort of roll up and quickly tap a couple of targets and then run away. Additionally, this is one of the first tanks that can't have a tank commander inside the tank itself, because the tank commander actually holds onto the storm rifle and they can't swap to their binoculars. So it kind of puts the Brigand in sort of a weird spot where it can easily get flanked and killed by infantry if the quote-unquote tank commander can't have a firing angle on them. So the Brigand, in my opinion, it's a really meh tank in the sense that you kind of roll into a tank line and you don't shoot enemy tanks with it. You shoot like pillboxes, or you can you can spend 30mm rounds to kill infantry or to suppress a target. So it's an interesting vehicle. I haven't seen it used for its primary intent, which is supposed to be like a flanker. Like all the entire Gallagher chain of vehicles needs to be like flanking vehicles, and the Brigand basically just doesn't fulfill that role at all. It's like it's an actual utility outlaw-ish vehicle that you roll forward and you might destroy like a pillbox or something and then retreat with it. So as is, it gets a C roll. It doesn't perform as well as the Devets because the Devets actually have 40mm shots. So as is, I think it's an okay vehicle, but yeah, really, I haven't really seen fronts being pushed by this thing. I usually am scared of like a line of Devets. When I see a line of Brigands, it's I'm like, these guys aren't wealthy enough to upgrade it. So yeah, meh tank, 30mm late game is not that great. So leave it at that. All right, the Gallagher Thornfall. This is the Bone Law. My goodness gracious, this thing got a massive buff. Wow, this thing is great now. Almost overpowered, but the Bone Law is really good at sniping large, risky threats now. I have seen some amazing play by Wardens using this thing to snipe BTs. You can now fully like disable, if not almost kill, a BT with one full salvo, just because of the buff to arc RPG and the changes to how quickly this thing can shoot rockets. So this got buffed in the fact that these rockets, or it's not really rockets, but oh, it is. It's a rocket-propelled grenade. Okay, so the arc ammo now shoots faster out of the Thornfall. That's one of the buffs that it got. So, and increased damage, and high mobility. It's a great vehicle. It's great. It does its job great. It's a tank hunter. It is an amazing tank hunter. It's really fast. It actually performs the role that it's intended for. You're supposed to like flank around, quickly snipe a tank, and then run away with it. I really love the love that the devs have given to this tank. It's in a great spot right now. Might be a little bit too strong, but it's not overpowered. I think it's nice that the Wardens have a really nice tank hunter vehicle. It serves the same sort of role in a slightly different capacity to the Battleships. Whereas the Battleships can roll into a main tank line and brawl, this one can roll behind a tank line, kill a lot of stuff, and then run away before anyone can do anything to it. Yeah, what can I say? I have nothing but praise for the Bone Law. The Thornfall really is in a nice spot, and well done to the devs for implementing it the way it is right now. Okay, this is the spicy one. The Gallagher Highwaymen. Yikes, dude, yikes. I feel very sorry for my Warden brothers. They gutted your tank. There's no other way to put it. The Highwayman doesn't see play at all. The 20 mil doesn't do anything. This is supposed to like fight medium battle tanks upwards. It cannot do that anymore. And this is just because of the changes of the 20 mil. I really thought that the Highwayman might be good in the fact that it could suppress tank turrets. But I have seen Highwaymans on the front line, and they just don't do anything. They lose to hatchets. It's actually better. It's actually better to just have the base vehicle as opposed to this one. Yeah. Alongside the Pelakis and the Percutio, Highwayman has been gutted. It's unusable. Even though it has the most accurate 12.7 gun in the game. I don't know what to say. It's just crap. And yeah, I really hope the devs fix 20 mil. the Typhon Halftrack and the Highwayman and the Pelakis and the Percutio have just got the bad end of this nerf stick over the last couple of patches, and that's now prevalent with its F tier ranking. Alright, here's the other spicy one. Gallagher Outlaw. This, in my opinion, is now ridiculous. It's still overpowered. So yes, you now need a facility to build it. But once you've built it and it's deployed on the battlefield, man, it has almost no equal. I see these things in tank lines of 6 and more, and the entire tank line collapses. Just from my personal experience, I was in the second Brody Town push going into War 120. So Brody Town was the final victory point that we tried to seize. We were on top of the town hall. Like, I actually did a bayonet rush into the town hall to try and finish off the war for War 120. And at the turn of a hat, easily 10 of these outlaws formed a line outside the town. They pushed in and they completely crushed us. And Wardens pushed us so far back out of the hex that they managed to invade Colonial and tap it. So we went. The front line went all the way from Brody Town into Colonial, and Wardens took over just because of the momentum that the outlaw provided. This is ridiculously strong. 40 millimeter round on a 45 meter chassis is insane. But the devs added a high velocity modifier to the Outlaw in the Infantry update, which means it now deals more damage per shot than the Spatha. Now the Spatha reloads faster, way faster, so the overall DPS of the Spatha is higher. But the Outlaw is a tank line darter. It moves in and out of combat, so it'll move forward, take a high velocity 40 mil shot, do damage, and then pull back before the enemy can retaliate because of that 5 meter range difference. It is ridiculously strong, and I don't know if removing the high velocity modifier would change that. So right now it's a very oppressive tank. Again, you put multiple these in a line, and you don't need any other vehicle to support it. Like, you really don't. You don't need silver hands. You don't need BTs even. You just spam the hell out of this tank. They all sit at 45 meter range, and the Colonial tank line can't do anything. These things can if you have enough Outlaws, they can one-shot the Spathas very easily now. And they're also really good at their counters. Yeah, what can I say? Outlaws are overpowered, and I appreciate that the devs put them under facility locked vehicles like I suggested, but in the current time and space, they just overperform. And what's interesting though is the original vision, the dev vision for the Outlaw, is this was supposed to be a flanking vehicle. This was supposed to come in from the side and use its sniper turret to disable tanks from the side and then retreat before they got a chance to retaliate. They don't need to fuss with that at all. The Outlaws just sit in a line, and if you have enough of them, they crush it. They crush tank line and all the defenses that come with it. They completely crush the emplaced ATs. They completely crush the frontline bunker bases. They crushed infantry with their storm rifle turrets. They are the best tanks in the game, and they're too strong. And the devs need to do something to change them. I don't know what that change needs to be. Maybe remove the commander seat. I don't know. Remove the high velocity modifier. I'm not sure. But they're currently in a bad spot, in my opinion. And if the Wardens have 10 of these on a front line, that front line is just over. You have to shell it to death with 120s and hope they don't know how to press S. That's your best chance at killing them. We had to do incredibly organized sticky rushes to just give our tanks a fighting chance. So yeah, OP as all hell. And I really hope that the devs do something about the Outlaw. The Outlaw spam. It's just too crazy. So I'll leave it at that. Alrighty, let's talk about the Colonial tank line now. And man, there's a couple of spicy entries here. But let's jump into it. So first of all, let's talk about the Falchion. The Falchion hasn't seen any significant change since last time. Last time I put it as a A-tier tank. In my opinion, it is still an A-tier tank. Does its job perfectly. You roll in, you kill some stuff, you die. But, you know, very, very usable 40 mil platform. And spammable with its crate bonus. Yeah, can't go wrong with Falchions. Great tank. Does its job perfectly. Nothing wrong with it. Easily tracked, easily killed. But it will take down something with it. Right, the next thing is the Spatha. Spatha used to be overpowered, but it is now oppressed by the Outlaw. Still reloads much faster. Overall highest DPS 40 mil weapon in the game. But it did see a nerf to its high velocity modifier, so it does 10% less damage than before. Still is facility locked, but just because of the strength of the Outlaw and the fact that it has 5 meter range on it, and it is the only thing that Colonials can really spam to take out frontline bunker bases, but it still gets hit by eats and it still dies to Starbreakers, whereas the Outlaw can outrange all of that. Yeah, I'm going to put the Spatha in S tier. it's not overpowered as it is before, just because the Outlaw is a really good bully to it now. If there's a line of Spathers and a line of Outlaws show up, the Outlaws win. If the Outlaws know what they're doing. I mean, if they're new players, then it all comes down to skill expression. Yeah, I think the high velocity nerf has hit the Spath a little bit hard. Is it in a good spot? Right now it is, just because of how strong the Outlaw is. If the Outlaw sees a nerf, then it might go back to being overpowered. So realistically speaking, these two can swap positions very, very easily, depending on what weapon change the dev mans add. So, yeah, hold W, kill things with the Spather, sit in a tank line for several hours and destroy everything in the Outlaw. That's the sort of two dichotomy that these two vehicles now have with each other. All right, let's move on. This might change depending on what DevMan decides to do. All right, the next thing is the Talos. So the Talos is still S tier. It's the premier 75mm shot. It's the cheap, dirty BT without it being an actual BT that the Colonials have. Yeah, it's still in a good spot. Actually, the Talos got a buff because it no longer requires steel to make. It only requires processed construction materials. So for logistics players, the Talos is in a really nice space because it's a really powerful 75mm shell that doesn't require steel to make. So it's technically a tier 2 tank, so in the tech tree, but you need steel to build the facility to make it. So it's still a tier 3 vehicle. But yeah, Talos is great. Again, you pair it up with a 68mm tank, and there's an amazing 68mm tank that can go with it. So yeah, definitely sits in S tier. Not gonna go any different with it from there. All right, the Nemesis. This is the hot dog tank. For complete clarity, I did not play in the Nemesis in War 119 when it was released, but I did play with it in War 120. This is a really good tank. This is a nice medium tank destroyer that the Colonials got. The problem with this tank is it sits in a weird spot where it's a tank destroyer and it's a PvE tool, which makes it really strong. The Tremotors are really good for like clearing out bases, and it's one of these things where you can roll the tank into a position where it can just kind of sit and shoot 68. You could move it into a position where it can just sit and shoot Tremolas to destroy a target, and then the turret is sort of just like this free range turret that can just shoot any vehicles that try and get close to it. Now, that being said, it still loses to the targets that it's supposed to beat. The Nemesis loses to the Outlaw, and it loses to the Silverhand, and it also loses to the HGD. But it can still do a significant amount of damage with its turret to make it trade efficiently. So in a 1v1 situation, those tanks still win. But the Nemesis can be used in aggressive ways in such a way that it can damage a lot of targets, escape, or do flanks, or PvE. So, I'm teetering on putting the Nemesis on overpowered. I think this is a great vehicle that the devs added to replace the Pedikis, which it did do. But I still think that Wardens are still unsure on how to counter this thing. So I'm going to put it under S tier. But if I had a tier where it's like S but almost overpowered, then I would definitely put the funny hot dog tank in there. I don't think it's an overpowered, just purely on the fact that I need to justify this, but I don't think it's overpowered. Just purely because there are a couple of factors after using this tank quite a bit in War 120. The number one thing is this tank gets turreted very easily. And I think it has an increase in the chance of it being turreted. So you can easily disable this tank from being effective in a dive, but it counteracts this by having a lower disable chance, and it also has a higher chance to not get tracked. So it's hard to track, it's hard to disable, but it's really easy to turret. In a tank v tank battle situation, so this, I'm imagining this thing fighting a heavy tank destroyer, an HCD, or an outlaw. Those two tanks are really good at countering it because they can disable the turrets very quickly and then push and kill them. But if you get in a position where this thing gets on top of you and its tremolers come to bear, and it can make effective use of its low disable and low track chance, you are going to be punished fighting it. So it sits in a weird spot. I don't think it's overpowered when it's in a line versus line situation. I think the Outlaw is way better and the HCD is way better. But for its intended role of interesting new assault tank, I think it's strong. So Nemesis goes into S tier. It's not overpowered. Just because it gets beaten by the things that it's supposed to counter in the scenario that it is placed in. These tanks are supposed to fight other line tanks, but it loses to them. Unless you have a lot of them and they push you. And then their tremolo launchers fire on like tracked targets, or it's just a crazy dive. This is a crazy dive tank. And it's interesting. And I mean, they're fun to play in, but I get turreted a lot. Almost every time I've seen more turreted nemesis on the front line than like regularly functioning nemesis. Yeah, there's something interesting about their turret. Just gets knocked out very quickly, and that makes the tank interesting. So for now, I think Wardens are still trying to figure out how to counter it. It's not incredibly overpowered as a lot of people may think it is, but as is, Nemesis definitely gets into the S tier spot. Alrighty, let's talk about the Bardiche. So Bardiche got a double shot, which gives it a little bit more usability in the fact that it can dive tanks a little bit better. So I think the Bardiche now goes into S tier just because it has a better alpha strike. But again, can easily be countered by holding S and shooting it with better range. But it got a buff without any significant downsides. So goes up in the tier. I think the Bardiche is in a good spot. So definitely worthy of its S ranking. The Rancier, the king of no man's land fighting. It did get a bit of a buff because the rockets can shoot a bit faster. I haven't seen a significant change in its gameplay loop since this introduction. Purely because the effectiveness of the rockets is completely proportional to whether or not they bounce or not. So firing 4 rockets faster, but they still bounce against enemy armor, doesn't make it perform any better. But it allows you to reload them slightly faster when you're PvEing things. So for that reason, I'm not going to move the Rancier around too much from my previous ranking. So previously, I think I put the Rancier at the B tier, around there somewhere. And I think it deservingly gets to stay in the B tier. So even though it got a buff, I haven't seen a massive impact in its usability. So it'll stay where it was since last time. Right, the final tank to talk about is just the Ballista in terms of the Colonials. So this is the 250 bolt platform. This is an essential vehicle. You need it to break concrete. So it's not going to change. And we're going to see the Chieftain in here a little bit later. So it is now a tank variant. So you need to build the Scorpion to upgrade it into a Ballista. I think that's a decent change. And I think it's fair. I think mass producing Ballistas in certain scenarios was too overpowered for Colonials. And genuinely, honestly speaking, I would rather see more Scorpions in the front. So in my opinion, it's a nerf, but it's also a buff. So it's a rebalance. So I think the Ballista requiring a facility to be built is fair. It's fair for both sides. It's fair for Wardens needing to build upgrade their Silver Hands to Chieftains. And for me as a Colonial player, I want to see more Scorpions in the front. So I like this change. 100%. I'm fine with the Ballista and the changes that devs added to it. So yeah, perfectly okay with it. All right, let's talk about the Warden medium armor. Silver Hand. So Silver Hand, last time I gave it an A ranking. I think it stays in A. Hasn't seen massive, significant changes to the weapon bloom. It still is the premier. You sit in the line and you try and kill it. Well, you try and kill things with it. Tank still performs really well in its intended job. Can't really say anything bad about it. I think the devs did change one thing. You used to be able to get very close to a Silverhand and then the 68mm turret can't hit you. But now it seems like it can. So it may have been a bug that got fixed. Yeah. So it performs slightly better. But you know what? Just because of the introduction of the Nemesis and the massive status that the Outlaw is in, I think it's fair to just put the Silverhand as a decent fighting vehicle. So we'll put it under A. And as a weapons platform, it's a nice base vehicle. So we'll see how things change. But for now, yeah, Silverhand performs adequately. Chieftain, like I said, this is an essential weapon. Wardens need this to dump 250mm into a concrete base. Yes, they can do that with the Balfour Pushgun, but the Pushgun can get suppressed by 12.7, which is MG garrisons. Which does make it slightly slightly less appealing to use, but again, if you're going to be tearing down a concrete mega fortress, you're going to be using chieftains. You're not going to be using pushguns. So, essential vehicle stays there until the devs decided to add in an alternative to 250mm, which they might do with aircraft. We'll see. Lord Scar, blah, yeah, S tier, hasn't changed. Still does moderately well. Absolutely punishes tanks that don't respect it. I will say one thing. Wardens, please, for the love of all of the... I will even say for the love of Callahan, stop vetting this damn thing. You're putting a massive target on your head. Please stop vetting this vehicle. And I'm not saying that because, lol, he's just saying that so that we stop vetting it and it makes it hard. It makes it easier to kill. No. My God, man. This is such an expensive vehicle to put steel into. Please stop vetting it and make more of them. They're an awesome tank to contribute to your outlaw lines. Stop vetting these things, man. I know it's cool drip, but geez Louise, just keep the base Lord's car. It's an awesome tank. 94.5, great shot. I'm not gonna go on about it. Serves its role perfectly as it is in the S tier. Alrighty. So that's it for all the medium tanks. Silverhands are perfectly fine where they are. It's just they get overshadowed by their big brother, the nasty outlaw variant. So can't say much more about it. Okay, let's talk about the Flood. Oh, not sorry, the Flood, the Lance. This is the Lance. This is the Lance 36. This is the Colonial battle tank. Yeah. It's good. Battle tanks are generally good. Goes into S tier. Performs relatively well for its intended role. 75mm shot. Has a turret. Very tanky. Sits in a tank line. Does its job perfectly fine. Yeah. I'm just going to make this tier list a little bit bigger. So just give me a moment. I'm not using the website because the website isn't updated. So I'm just doing this in Microsoft PowerPoint, the best application on your computer. There we go. Yeah. Can't say anything negative about the Lance 36. 75mm shot into enemy faces, PvEs, shoots tanks, loves to flank. Great. Okay, BTD. 94.5. Last time I put this tank in, I think it was A tier? No, it was B tier. It's slow, it can't PvE. Actually, I'm going to move this down. So the BTD is actually going to C tier because the Nemesis has filled a role that we were forced to use when we used the BTD. So originally the BTD was released as a line fighting vehicle for Colonials. We generally had to make a lot of BTDs to fight HTDs, to fight Outlaws, and to generally push the Warden tank line a little bit. That role is now filled by the Nemesis. But you need multiple Nemesis. So you need like 3 or 4 Nemesis to do the same thing that a BTD can. So in a scenario where you have a BTD, the BTD is still good in that role of like pushing the enemy tank line. But it's easier and faster for us to deploy multiple Sylvans. It's faster and easier for us to deploy multiple Nemesis, so the BTD has dropped in its significance. Additionally, the Nemesis can PvE. So once you kill the enemy tank line and you're up at their bunker base and you're trying to destroy the bunker base, the BTD or the Hasta is completely useless. It can't do anything except shoot infantry with its very expensive weapon, or very expensive ammunition for its weapon. So you don't want to do that. So it's better to just roll in a Nemesis. Nemesis will always have Tremolos in them because Tremolos are our infantry PvE tool. So the Nemesis just does its role better. Therefore, the BTD gets a lower ranking than before. And because it's also slow as hell, it also faces troubles with the bloom, so it can't dart backwards and forwards very quickly. Well, can't do that with the movement speed anyway. Yeah, I have no love for the BTD at all. I think it's a stupid tag. The Nemesis just does its job better. You need more of them. You need more Nemesis. I will acknowledge that fact. But the BTD is so slow. Yeah. Easily gets eaten up by tanks on flanks and outlaws at range. So, no love for that thing. So it gets AC ranking from me. Okay, Colonial SPG. This seems like a essential weapon because it's an artillery piece, but I'm comparing it to the Thunderbolt. So this battle tank variant is being compared to the base artillery that you have to shoot 150 with. I really like playing with these things. So I'm a bit biased in saying that this is an awesome vehicle to have to shoot 150 with. But this thing can't assault concrete well. I hate to say it. This thing is not great for shooting concrete with, and that's what it's supposed to do. Yes, you get the guys who build like 4 or 5 of these and they sit in the line and then they attack a howitzer trap. The howitzer trap just eats them for breakfast because a howitzer trap will decrew an SPG very quickly. It is not a tool that is frequently used by colonials to crush concrete. If you want to crush concrete, you bring thunderbolts and you put them at minimum range, and then you build a complicated trench network to protect your infantry. You can't do that with the colonial SPG because I swear, whenever I'm fighting howitzers with this damn thing, the howitzer decrews the entire SPG in 1 or 2 salvos. Now, this is a great tool to use defensively to shoot enemy tank lines with, and it performs way better than the Thunderbolt for assaulting enemy tank lines. But in that scenario, I would rather use 120s because 120s are more accurate than the SPG. So I love shooting this thing. I'm very conflicted giving this thing a ranking because I love shooting the SPG. It's not an essential to you. Don't need this to win because you need Thunderbolts to win, but you don't need this thing to win. So I'm going to put it under D ranking just purely because it gets decrewed so damn fast. It's a fun weapon, and it's really big boom, and it's awesome, and infantry can sit on the side, blah, 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 blah. But it's a defensive tool for colonials, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have something to kill concrete and win the war with. And the colonial SPG ain't it, bro. It's just meh. So, we'll leave it at that. I really wish it was better. If this thing doesn't get decrewed by howitzers at the rate it is now, it goes to S tier immediately. This is one of those things where it's binary bad or binary good. If you never get decrewed, it's binary good. If you always get decrewed, which is what the current status of this vehicle is, it's binary bad. So therefore, it's binary bad. It gets into D tier. If you need to attack, you use a Thunderbolt. If you need to defend, if you have an SPG lying around somewhere on a hook, okay, cool, use that. I really wish it was better. This is a fun tank. I really wish it was better, but it gets a D ranking. Okay, it's now time for the Warden. Super heavy, strong stuff. Let's start off with the Flood Mark 1. So this is the base battle tank with the MG turret. This is a great vehicle. It's slightly better than the Colonial one in the sense that the turret has more range or more radius, the MG one, so it's better suppressing infantry, and it's faster, but it has less health. So it's like You're trading off health, pure raw strength, like survivability, versus more utility and speed. I think it's a fair trade-off. So it plays differently to the Colonial one. This might be a, Colonial always think that Warden weapons are better, but I generally think that the Warden BT is slightly better just in its usability and its speed. So it goes into S ranking. I genuinely enjoy fighting these things. I'll be honest. I genuinely enjoy fighting Warden battle tanks. They are a challenge to overcome, and I respect people who play them well. So if you're a Warden battle tank enjoyer, I really enjoy playing against you. I think you have the slightly better vehicle in a BT versus BT scenario, but I think it's fair. My tank will survive 2 or 3 hits more. Your tank can dodge a little bit easier. The moment you track a Warden Flood Mark 1, it's Jover for it. So I think it's fair. It's a fair tank. It performs this role really well. It's the best weapon that the Wardens have to shoot 75 with, because their Pushgun is crap. Okay, then the Warden Flamethrower variant. It's on par with it. You swap out the MG for a Flamethrower to assault positions a little bit better. Yeah, it's still good. Flame variant, nothing wrong with it. Heavy flame vehicle, getting in its face. Yeah, it's good. So, I'm not going to say anything bad about the Flood Mark 7. Okay, Warden SPG. So, the Warden SPG can't be decrewed by counterfire. S tier. It's just better. Objectively better. If the Colonial SPG does not get decrewed by 120 howitzer return fire, it goes to S tier. Warden ones, I think I may have seen it get decrewed by a howitzer once in my entire time playing Colonial, and Wardens love using this SPG. It's good. What can I say? It's way better. It's way better than the Warden 150, the Exalt. It just is. It is something that you bring into fight concrete with. You don't bring in the Colonial one to fight concrete with. You bring in just Thunderbolts because they survive longer and they have less spread. So yeah, what can I say? I really wish that the Colonial SPG got a little bit more love. That it doesn't get. It has the same resilience to being decrewed that the Stain has. So great vehicle. Wardens enjoy it. Genuinely a great battle tank variant to have. All right. Just to double back 1 sec, I completely forgot to do the HDD. So let's go and talk about the HDD. HDD is relatively unchanged, so it still gets its S tier ranking. It's not overpowered. I want to put it in overpowered, but it's fair. And I actually think that the hot dog tank that can trade with this, but still lose, is fair. I think it's fair. So when the Nemesis rolls up, they will both take tracking shots. If this thing gets tracked first and then gets flanked or gets hard pushed by multiple Nemesis, it will lose. But if it sits in the road with proper support, it can still hold positions very well. And it's still MPF-able, just like the Nemesis is now as well. So I think the Widow is still in a good spot. It is for its intended role of fucking up tanks, it does great. So it stays in S tier. I think this is a well-designed tank. It probably is a lot less overpowered just because the Nemesis is a thing. We don't have to fight this thing with stupid LTDs anymore, even with the LTD nerfs. We actually have a tank that can fight with it in a proper tank line scenario. So it is lower in the S ranking tier than before. Previously, I would have really tossed this thing into overpowered, but I think it is fairly sitting in S now. Good tank. Not going to complain about it. Warden Noble Firebrand. Sorry. No, still F tier. Fire mortars beat it. If you really, really want to bring a big, nasty flamethrower, you bring in a Flood that's upgraded with a heavy flamer on it. And if that's not your style, you bring in attack to quickly touch the target with fire to put it on fire with a flamethrower. Yeah, don't waste the HDD. Don't waste your HDD chassis building this piece of trash. Just no, it doesn't. It doesn't perform its role in any capacity. I actually thought of a better way to buff this thing. Devman, if you're watching, please give this an off-road bonus. please make this thing go really fast off-road. Like, you can make it so that, you know, it doesn't need to carry 68mm ammo or blah, 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 and is a lot more efficient or it's a lot more streamlined. Keep it the same turning radius and the turning speeds, but give it like an off-road bonus, so it can like roll over like a trench line and burn a bunker base. Man, that would be sick. But yeah, as it is currently, if you need to burn stuff, fire mortars, fire rockets, tack, flood, juggernaut, not this thing. Please don't waste an HCD building this thing. I beg of you, Warden, just send the HCD. It's better. Okay. So, super heavy tanks, and then we'll do ships, and then we'll call it for this video. But we're going to go through these relatively quickly. The Ares is still crap. Don't build it. It hasn't gotten better. Hasn't seen any changes. Don't build the stupid Ares. It's just it's a bad bullet sponge. And with the strength that the Outlawed is right now, you will never bring the Ares in a position where it will beat a proper Warden tank line just because of how strong the Outlaw is right now. So don't do this. Don't build this. DevMan, make it better. Predator is still good. It hasn't changed in its significance at all. It's a little bit more expensive to make with the rare changes. But I mean, that's fair with the Ares as well. I think the Predator is still fine. It can shoot AP grenades now, but it has never relied on its grenade launcher to do tank v tank damage. And the AP grenades are not used for PvE, which is what you want to use the Tremolos for anyway. Yeah, the big hot dog tank, is still good. And I'm not going to naysay it any further. It gets the S ranking, and the Ares is still crap. All right. Let's quickly go over naval weapons. I would like to put all of these as essential, but I can't because there are some ways that we can compare them. So first, let's talk about the Colonial gunboat. Because of the changes to 20mm, this is now a crap weapon. Previously, the Typhons on this thing made it comparable to the Ronin gunboats. We have lost that firepower. And we have no interchangeable weapon with it. There is no way to sugarcoat this. This is an underpowered, terrible weapon to have. You only use gunboats if you're in control of the water. If the Wardens contest you with a fleet of Ronins, you have to fight it with APCs. And that is just straight up facts. Okay? I was in War 119. I was in a naval hex. I was based in Terminus that war. We tried using the gunboats. It did not work. We didn't win any battles. Now you can chime that up to lol skill issue, but we had Typhons on our gunboats. We could not beat any Ronins 1v1. And the Ronins usually came in like groups of 2 or 3. So they were like wolf packs hunting stuff, which was awesome. It was great to see the Wardens doing that. I mean, they've been doing it for a couple wars now, but significantly in that war, we were only able to go toe-to-toe with it once we switched to APCs. And the Dawns, which were too strong, and the devs nerfed it or they fixed the bug or whatever you want to call it. But right now, the Sharons are terrible. Because of the 20mm nerfs, the Typhon was the best possible choice to load it with. Now we're forced to use ISGs that bounce, and they don't decrew as easily as arc ammo. So, Sharons are crap. I hate to say it, it's not in a good space. The devs need to do something. And there's a whole bunch of other bugs with it as well. Like, the Sharon turret can't hit Warden gunboat crew members sitting inside the turrets and things. It's not in a good spot, and I really this is the #1 vehicle that needs a rework somehow. I'll leave it up for the devs to figure out, but it is not a great weapon to use. Ask any Warden Navy man who plays with it; they don't like it, and the Colonial Navy agrees with the Wardens. We don't like this ship. And that's that. Let's hope for some better days later on. All right. Conversely, the Warden gunboat, it goes into A tier. It is not an S tier. It does really, really well for the task that it's given, but it has a couple of flaws that it sometimes struggles with. But notably, it is really fast. It is really fast. It can outpace destroyers, so you can kite ships with it, specifically with its 360 turret. It is a very good vehicle. I'm not going to put it under S tier because it still loses to things like, you know, APCs and being flanked and being jumped. But when I compare these two, they are leagues apart. Like I said, I would rather use an APC to fight the rodent gunboat, and because you can mount bone saws on it, that makes it really good. I'm half tempted to put this under S if not overpowered, but I think a fair ranking for it is A. Just because I think the state of the Colonial Navy weapons is bad, so it would be unfair to mark this one up for the failures of the other ship's designs, or their balance, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so I'm going to put it under A. Let's see if things change. This might get better as things go. Okay, Colonial Titan battleship. Don't really need this to win, so it's not an essential vehicle. I think it's A. I think the Titan's fine. Bombards targets. It wins in broadside fights, but it loses on head-on fights. I think it's fair. I'm not going to say too much about Titans. I don't see them very often because they usually get torpedoed and they die. Callahan. This is the battleship. This is the Callahan class battleship. I'm going to put this on par with the Titan. Coastal bombardment. The two are equivocal. Except I think the Callahan has slightly more health. Okay. I'm going to put the Callahan in... No, you know what? Health doesn't affect that much. I'm going to keep these two at A. They're fine. They do their job perfectly fine. They bombard stuff. They're very expensive. They're hard to maneuver. They get countered by torpedoes. Yeah, that's fine. They're A tier. They do their job as intended. Conqueror. This is the Colonial Destroyer. This goes to B tier. We've been playing a lot with the Conqueror in WL for the last couple of months. We have started identifying some glaring issues with it. A lot of players would disagree with us, but we don't mind playing in a Conqueror. It's an okay ship. There are some problems with it. It used to be able to 1v1 other ships very easily. We have found that because of some prevalent bugs, that other ships perform slightly better than it. Once those bugs get better, this goes into S tier. So right now, just for absolute clarity, there is a bug in the game where you can bail water through an ammo room. All ships can do this. Every large ship can do this. But the Destroyer is really well built for bailing water over the side and out the top out of the ship as it is. So it isn't impacted too greatly by this, or it doesn't get a massive benefit from this bug as opposed to its rival, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But as it is, it performs perfectly fine. So the Destroyer is an okay ship to deploy. Black Steel. This is an S tier ship because it benefits the most from this bailing bug. The Black Steel is specifically designed to be bad at doing repairs. If you go look at the release video for the Black Steel, where they changed all the torpedoes and stuff, if you go look at the dev diaries and if you go look at the dev video, they specifically said that the Black Steel is supposed to be hard to do repairs on. And because of that, it has turrets that are closer to each other so that they can be supplied more easily while the cabin fills up with water after they take a hole or a torpedo or something. But because of this bailing bug, Wardens don't need to get to the top of the deck to bail the water out. Now, you can pull buckets from the ship's inventory, fill the bucket up and drop it on the ground, but that entire process takes a lot of time. It's faster to just put water in the bucket and then bail through the ammo room to glitch the water outside the ship, which is what all large ships are doing. But because the Black Steel is balanced, or supposedly balanced, in the fact that it's supposed to be hard to bail water and repair, this makes it the premier ship on the water right now. And I'm not going to humor any discussions with it. It's because of this bug. The moment this bug is fixed, then both of these ships go to A tier and they perform their role the same way that the battleships do. The Black Steel is just better because it doesn't suffer from its intended negative downside, right? The Conqueror doesn't benefit from it, so it performs worse. And because of this, it has all the benefits of faster reloading, faster engagement, better speed to have its significant advantages over the Conqueror and the Trident. So as is, the Black Steel is strong. It's not overpowered because I think it's going to get fixed, and you can actually sink this thing with significant amount of concentrated artillery fire. So this is in line to get a nerf, but it's not quite overpowered. It can still be countered relatively easily, at least for its intended role. Alright, so that's with the Black Steel. It is currently strong because of a bug. The moment the devs fix it, it's probably going to go down in this ranking. Alright, we're almost done. The next to talk about is the Naki submarine. This is a strong ship. I'm going to put the Naki under overpowered. I know it has seen some nerfs, but these nerfs are still insignificant compared to the state of the Trident. The Naki is the king of the sea. It beats everything. It'll beat Conquerors, it will beat Tridents, and it will beat Titans. There's nothing that can compete with this. When we go to hunt Nakis, currently the Colonial Navy is prepared to sacrifice a destroyer to kill it. Whereas when a Naki goes out, it is probably ready to sink like 3 or 4 ships before it gets taken out. That is too strong. So the Naki is strong because of the state of the torpedo. Now, it's a great hunting tool, and that's what the devs envisioned for it. But right now, the Naki is just too good at its role. Even though it saw a bit of a nerf, which, in my humble opinion, was not necessary, they just needed to make the Trident better. But they pseudo-nerfed the Naki to sort of make it a little bit more comparable to the Trident, but that hasn't changed its performance whatsoever. The Wardens are making good use of the Nakis, and I applaud the Wardens for doing that, but the ship is still too oppressive, just because of the state of torpedoes. I have a specific torpedo nerf in mind. They could make the torpedo impact still dangerous for a large ship to make it significant without it being so oppressive. Because right now, you get hit by a torpedo, your ship is gone, or you have to spend 4 hours crippling it back to a seaport. It's not a fun gameplay loop. So because of that, the Naki is strong. And this brings us into our final ranking, which is the Trident. This is the Colonial submarine. And it just goes into D tier. It's not completely unusable just because of the state of the torpedo. When the torpedo does land or hit its mark, it will probably sink a ship. But let's be real. The Colonials only use the Trident for the torpedo. We don't use it for its 120mm. I haven't seen any significant 120mm play with the Trident. The 120mm artillery gun can't turn easily because the turn radius of the Trident is horrible. So this vehicle could use a little bit of love, and it basically suffers from the same sort of downsides that other Colonial vehicles has. Its base envisioned role as this like sneaky submarine that also can go in and cause some trouble with this 120mm gun never sees active use. Like, I'm just looking at it compared to the SPG here, where the SPG is supposed to crack concrete, but we don't use it to crack concrete because it gets decrewed too easily. We don't use the sneaky aspect of the Trident because it's a massive ship that can't turn easily. So yeah, it's basically trying to be a Conqueror submarine, but if we want to shoot 120 at the Wardens, we'll just take out a Conqueror, man, or we'll take out a Titan. We won't take out this thing to go bombard the coastal emplacements. It's not good at doing that, and I think this could use a bit of change. Maybe change up its armament a little bit. Maybe make its singular gun a 150, or just give it a better turn radius, make it smaller. The Trident has such an interesting identity with its like open and closing hatch to load shells into it or whatever. It just doesn't perform the role that it's currently that the devs intended for it, and that's just really sad to me and just horrible to use. The turn radius isn't great. So yeah, it can still shoot the really strong torpedo. Hopefully the Wardens are asleep at the wheel and you catch them by surprise. Because if there's a frigate hunting a Trident, the frigate wins. If a frigate is hunting a destroyer, the frigate wins. If a Trident is hunting a Naki, the Naki wins. If a Naki is hunting a Conqueror, it's basically a 1-for-1 trade. And that's just the current state of naval. We'll see how it improves. But for now, this is where I'm going to be placing all my rankings. And I think that's a fair place to put it. Okay. So with that being said, this is where things are going to land for now. There are probably going to be changes to vehicles throughout the year. We're definitely probably going to see some changes to the Nemesis as well as some of the other vehicles. And we'll see what DevMan has cooking for the air update. Just like before, just to mention to new players, if you are trying to get into Foxhole and you're trying to figure out some vehicles to have a go at, if you are Warden, I would recommend getting yourself a light tank. This is an easy vehicle to master. If you are Colonial and you're trying to get into tanking, get yourself a Falchion. The main mass production tank that the Colonials have. If you're trying out Foxhole and you want to get into tanking, these are the two vehicles I recommend. They're the easiest to learn and the most useful to have on the battlefield. Previously I said that Colonials need to try out the half-track as well. The half-track has really fallen off. So if you actually want to get into... So, okay, let me put it this way. If you want to shoot buildings and other tanks, Devitt and Falchion for both respective sides is the way to go. If you want to try anti-infantry vehicles for Colonials, I would recommend this one, the Scorpion. The Scorpion is great. So this is our anti-infantry solution in a main tank line. And if you are Warden and you want to kill infantry and have a good time, you know what? I would actually recommend the Brigand. So if you just want to shoot, buildings and vehicles, these two are the way to go. But if you want to also shoot infantry and do suppression stuff, then these two vehicles are great. So these are my recommendations. For new Warden tankers, try out the Devitt and try out the Brigand. And for new Colonial players, you want to try out the Falchion and you want to try out the Scorpion. So those are my 4 recommended vehicles, and this will get you going inside the Foxhole tanking meta. Okay, that's it for me. I probably yapped on again for too long, but people have been requesting I do an updated video, so here it is. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, and I'll see you guys later in the year where I'll probably do an update to this. We'll see how things goes. All right. Good luck for War 121. It's probably starting in about a couple days time, probably like 3 or 4 days. And I don't think there's going to be any significant balance changes, but I might be wrong. So we'll see how it goes. All right, good luck everyone, and have a good time playing Foxhole.